Hello, everyone. Well, today is for Tuesday, January the 28th of 2020, and we're going to be discussing 2 Samuel chapters 18 and 19. We are almost finished with the book of 2 Samuel. Well, in the past few chapters, we've seen the conspiracy tactics of David's son Absalom, the way he's taking over the kingdom from his father, King David. We've watched, he's had 4 years to influence people. And remember how he would stand at the gate, and before the people could even get to his father for judgment or whatever on one of their cases, he would be like, "Oh, the king is very busy, but if you will let me decide for you." And he moved them over, and he is a beautiful, handsome man, and they said he was more handsome than any in the land. He had the beautiful long hair that when he would get it cut, it would weigh so much every year and so forth. So yes, he is very charismatic, and he is conspiring to take the kingdom away from his father. So when we were looking at the last chapters, we saw David realizing that Absalom had quite a following now, and that they were planning on the takeover. So he had to get his household and his servants out of the area for their safety. And so we saw him walking barefoot and crying, and the people in the wilderness outside of Jerusalem had left his home, and he's out there without a home right now, without his kingdom right now, without any of that. And we read Psalms that he wrote during this time where he was not going to put his trust in man. His own son was conspiring against him and really planning and plotting his death. And his good friend and counselor Ahithophel had betrayed him and had gone over to Absalom's side. And then he sent his friend Hushai to thwart the advice of Ahithophel. We saw that last week. Well, as we're coming into it this week, we saw in 17 that the civil war was about to happen, that David had been warned that Absalom and all of Israel were coming for war, and their intent was to kill David. So as we begin chapter 18 today, we see that there are hundreds and thousands that David puts under the commands of 3 different men that he still has as supporters of his side, of the people who were still with him and believing in him and understanding that he was the Lord's anointed for the kingship. Okay, so let's start reading chapter 18. And as you guys know, I read from the New American Standard. Mine doesn't look very new anymore. It's kind of worn, isn't it? But this is the one I've been using all 50 years of my Christian walk with the Lord. Not this same exact Bible, but this version of the Bible. I've always used the New American Standard. But whatever version you have, that's great. Just read along with me. Okay, so I'm going to first read the first 5 verses in chapter 18. Okay. Then David numbered the people who were with him and set over them commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds. David sent the people out, 1/3 under the command of Joab, 1/3 under the command of Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, Joab's brother, and 1/3 under the command of Attai the Gittite. And the king said to the people, "I myself surely will go out with you also." And the people said, "You shall not go out. For if we indeed flee, they'll not care about us. Even if half of us die, they will not care about us. But you are worth 100,000 of us. Therefore, now it is better that you be ready to help us from the city." Then the king said to them, "Whatever seems best to you." And he said, "Whatever seems best to you." And so he stood beside the gate, and all the people went out by hundreds and thousands. And the king charged those three men, Joab, Abishai, and Ittai, that were over the groups of people. And what did he say to them? "Deal gently for my sake with the young man, Absalom." And all the people heard when the king charged all the commanders concerning Absalom. Okay, so David, he's got one thing on his mind. Please protect my son Absalom. Please don't kill Absalom in the battle. Please bring him back to me. He's my son. No matter what he's doing to usurp my authority, no matter what he's doing to take over my kingdom, he's my son, and I want him back. Please deal gently with him. Okay, so that is well-known fact, and they all heard that. I wanted to make a correction from something I said in last week's video. I typed it on my Facebook page under the video, but you know, anytime we accidentally have a slip of the tongue or a lapse in memory, or we do something in our teaching that's not exactly correct, we need to correct it. And what I need to correct is that when Shimei, the guy that was cursing and throwing stones and everything at David and the people, and Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, said, "Why don't we behead him? He shouldn't be allowed to curse you like that, curse the Lord's anointed." And David said, "No, let him be. The Lord told him to do that." Well, I said that he was a priest, that he was the son of a priest. And I was wrong. He is not the son of a priest. You know, I get a lot of the names mixed up. I think that's a common thing that can happen. And Abishai sounded a lot to me like Abiathar. And Abiathar is a priest, but this was not Abiathar. This was Abishai. And he's the same Abishai that is now being put over as one of the commanders of the people going out for the war. So he's Joab's brother, and the two of them are the sons of Zeruiah. Okay, so I wanted to correct that. So anyway, not a big thing. I mean, it's not like a doctrinal correction I had to make, but still, I wanted to. Okay, so we've got these three men, and they're being told, "Go gentle on Absalom," and they're going out to fight. So in verse 6, we read more about that. So let's read 6 through 18. "Then the people went out into the field against Israel, and the battle took place in the forest of Ephraim." So the battle took place in a forest of Ephraim. "The people of Israel were defeated before the servants of David, and the slaughter there that day was great, 20,000 men. For the battle there was spread over the whole countryside, and the forest devoured more people that day than the sword devoured." So it was fought in a forest, and there's all kinds of dangers in the forest, right? You could fall into a hole, you could be bit by a snake, you could be attacked by a wild animal. And so the forest devoured more people than the sword did. So it's kind of like, if you think of it that way, that the Lord was using the forest to help David's men have a victory over these men of Israel who had turned on David and had been following his son Absalom. Well, okay. Now Absalom happened to meet the servants of David. You know, he went into battle with them, right? "For Absalom was riding on his mule, and the mule went under the thick branches of a great oak, and his head caught fast in the oak. I'm surprised it didn't break his neck. But anyway, so that he was left hanging between heaven and earth while the mule that was under him kept going. So here's Absalom with his head caught in between the branches of this great oak tree. He cannot loosen himself. He's still alive, but he's just hanging there. The mule goes on. So one of the guys came and told Joab that he saw Absalom. It says, where was I? I lost my place. Okay. When a certain man saw it, I'm in verse 10, he told Joab, saying, behold, I saw Absalom hanging in an oak. Then Joab said to the man who had told him, now behold, you saw him? Why then did you not strike him there to the ground? And I would have given you 10 pieces of silver and a belt. The man said to Joab, even if I should receive 1,000 pieces of silver in my hand, I would not put out my hand against the king's son. For in our hearing the king charged you and Abishai and Ittai, saying, protect for me the young man Absalom. Otherwise, if I had dealt treacherously against his life, and there's nothing hidden from the king, then you yourself would have stood aloof. Then Joab said, I will not waste time here with you. So he took 3 spears in his hand and thrust them through the heart of Absalom, while he was yet alive in the midst of the oak. And 10 young men who carried Joab's armor gathered around and struck Absalom and killed him. I mean, you would think the 3 thrust into the heart would have done it, but if he had any life left in him at all, then these 10 men made really sure he was dead. Then Joab blew the trumpet, and the people returned from pursuing Israel because Joab restrained them. Then they took Absalom and cast him into a deep pit in the forest and erected over him a very great heap of stones. And all Israel fled, each to his tent. Now Absalom in his lifetime had taken and set up for himself a pillar, which is in the king's valley. For he said, I have no son to preserve my name. So he named the pillar after his own name, and it is called Absalom's monument to this day. Okay, so Absalom is now dead. And Joab did not obey David's command to go gentle on the young man Absalom, did he? Okay, so they've killed him and they buried him in the forest of Ephraim. So that's where Absalom's end happened. And now, you know, they can stop coming after Israel because there's really no reason to fight now. The one who was causing the conspiracy, who wanted to be the king, is now dead. Okay, so let's finish up reading this chapter and go on into the next chapter, and then we will have application at the end of it all. Okay? So next thing, let's see, verse 19 I'm in. Then Ahimaaz, the son of Zadok. Now Zadok is a priest, and Ahimaaz is his son. Remember the 2 sons that would report back to David when the priest would tell them information that from Absalom and all that. Then Ahimaaz, the son of Zadok, said, please let me run and bring the king news that the Lord has freed him from the hand of his enemies. But Joab said to him, you're not the man to carry news this day, but you shall carry news another day. However, you shall carry no news today, because the king's son is dead." Then Joab said to the Cushite, "Go tell the king what you've seen." So the Cushite bowed to Joab and ran. Now Ahimaaz, the son of Zadok, said once more to Joab, "But whatever happens, please let me run after the Cushite." And Joab said, "Why would you run, my son, since you will have no reward for going?" "But whatever happens," he said, "I will run." So Joab said to him, "Run." Then Ahimaaz ran by the way of the plain and passed up the Cushite. So Ahimaaz is actually going to be the first one. Now David was sitting between the two gates, and the watchman went up to the roof of the gate by the wall and raised his eyes and looked, and behold, a man running by himself. The watchman called and told the king, and the king said, "If he is by himself, there is good news in his mouth." And he came nearer and nearer. Then the watchman saw another man running, and the watchman called to the gatekeeper and said, "Behold, another man running by himself." And the king said, "This one also is bringing good news." The watchman said, "I think the running of the first one is like the running of Ahimaaz, the son of Zadok." I guess he had a reputation for how fast he could run. And the king said, "This is a good man and comes with good news." Ahimaaz called and said to the king, "All is well." And he prostrated himself before the king with his face to the ground. And he said, "Blessed is the Lord your God, who has delivered up the men who lifted their hands against my lord the king." The king had one question: "Is it well with the young man Absalom?" And Ahimaaz answered, "When Joab sent the king's servant and your servant, I saw a great tumult," which is like a commotion, "but I did not know what it was." Then the king said, "Turn aside and stand here." So he turned aside and stood still. Behold, the Cushite arrived. And the Cushite said, "Let my lord the king receive good news, for the Lord has freed you this day from the hand of all of those who rose up against you." Then the king said to the Cushite, "Is it well with the young man Absalom?" It's all he cares about. And the Cushite answered, "Let the enemies of my lord the king and all who rise up against you for evil be as that young man." Then he knew. The king was deeply moved and went up to the chamber over the gate and wept. And he said as he walked, "Oh, my son Absalom, my son Absalom, would I have died instead of you? Oh, Absalom, my son, my son." And that is where it ends in this chapter. But we go ahead and we are going to read chapter 19. We're going to start. Then it was told Joab, "Behold, the king is weeping and mourns for Absalom." The victory that day was turned to mourning for all the people, for the people heard it and said that day, "The king is grieved for his son." So the people went by stealth into the city that day. Stealth is like quietly, in a way that no one would notice them. Not in a victory march of any way, just in a quiet kind of disappear out of the way kind of way, as people who are humiliated steal away when they flee in battle. The king covered his face and cried out with a loud voice, "Oh, my son Absalom! Oh, Absalom, my son, my son!" Then Joab came into the house to the king and said, now Joab's going to confront David. Today you have covered with shame the faces of all your servants, who today have saved your life and the lives of your sons and daughters, the lives of your wives, and the lives of your concubines, by loving those who hate you and by hating those who love you. For you have shown today that princes and servants mean nothing to you. For I know this day that if Absalom were alive and all of us were dead, then you would be pleased. Now therefore arise, go out and speak kindly to your servants, for I swear by the Lord, if you do not go out, surely not a man will pass the night with you, and this will be worse for you than all the evil that has come upon you from your youth until now. You're going to have to get over it. And I mean, as leaders, when you've got people depending on you, you cannot be so excessive in your mourning for your own self that you can't see the forest for the trees because you're so involved in your own pain. You have to rise above your pain and be there for the people. And that's what Joab was telling him. So it says the king arose and sat in the gate. And when they told all the people, saying, behold, the king is sitting in the gate, then all the people came before the king. Now Israel had fled, each to his tent. And we'll read about that next. So he said, you're loving those who hate you. I mean, obviously, Absalom had hate for his father because he was planning his death to take over the kingdom. And so anyway, just the rising up. He needs to rise up. So let's continue reading, and I may go all the way to the end, or I'll stop and make some comments, but we will make some application at the end. Okay, so I'm going to keep reading in verse 11 of chapter 19. Well, no, I'm starting at verse 8 when it says all of Israel went to his tent. Verse 9. All the people were quarreling throughout all the tribes of Israel, saying, the king delivered us from the hand of our enemies and saved us from the hand of the Philistines. But now he has fled out of the land from Absalom. However, Absalom, whom we anointed over us, has died in battle. Now then, why are you silent about bringing the king back? Then King David said to Zadok and Abiathar the priest, saying, speak to the elders of Judah, to the tribe of Judah, speak to them, saying, why are you the last to bring the king back to the house, since the word of all Israel has come to the king, even to his house? You are my brothers, you are my bone and my flesh. Why then should you be the last to bring the king back? David is from the tribe of Judah. And remember in Revelation that Jesus is called the Lion from the tribe of Judah. Jesus came through the descendants of David. In the genealogies of Mary and Joseph, you read about how they trace back to King David. Mary through David's son Nathan, Joseph through David's son Solomon. But both of the genealogies trace back to David. And that's why sometimes, like the blind beggars on the street, when they would say, Son of David, have mercy on us, he was the Son of Man. He was the Son of God. And he was also the Son of David from the tribe of Judah. And so when David is now saying, I want my brothers who are my bone and my flesh, I want my relatives, why shouldn't they bring me back first? So that's what's going on. And then David said, say to Amasa, A-M-A-S-A, Amasa, are you not my bone and my flesh? May God do so to me and more Also, if you will not be commander of the array before me continually in place of Joab. Okay, so Joab is going to be replaced by Amasa now. And you wonder, did someone tell him that Joab was actually responsible for Absalom's death? Or is it that Joab came in and confronted him so strongly and told him to stop mourning for Absalom, to get out there and speak to the people and get on with it? Is he upset about that? Does he not want to have Joab as a commander anymore? Well, either way, Joab's days as commander are going to be over because David wants Amasa to be his commander now. Okay. All right. Thus he turned the hearts of all the men of Judah as one man, so that they sent word to the king, saying, "Return, you and all your servants." The king then returned and came as far as the Jordan. And Judah came to Gilgal. So you know the part of the Jordan where he's going to cross over, right there at Gilgal. And Judah, the tribe of Judah, came to Gilgal in order to go to meet the king, to bring the king across the Jordan. Then Shimei, the son of Jerah, the Benjaminite, who was from Bahurim, hurried and came down with the men of Judah to meet King David. There were 1,000 men of Benjamin with him, with Ziba, the servant of the house of Saul, and his 15 sons and 22 servants with him, and they rushed to the Jordan before the king. Okay, so you have Judah, and then you have these 1,000 men of Benjamin, which Saul was from the house of Benjamin, King Saul. And Ziba had been his servant, who also Ziba was the one put over Mephibosheth and all of that. And so he's part of all this. And then this Shimei, do y'all know who Shimei was? He was the one who cursed David, threw stones at David, threw dirt on David. And back then, we saw last week when this other guy said, Abishai said, why don't we just go cut his head off? I mean, here we are walking and you're already distraught and we're already, out here in the wilderness hungry and weary, and he's cursing you and he's throwing stones at you. He should die, and David was like, no, leave him alone. The Lord's told him to do that, and he just kept walking and receiving all this persecution, and we talked about that. Well, he's come down with 1,000 men from Benjamin, so they've all come down to be there to help the king go over the Jordan. Then verse 18, then they kept crossing the ford to bring over the king's household and to do what was good in his sight. And Shimei, the son of Jerah, fell down before the king as he was about to cross the Jordan. So he said to the king, let not my lord consider me guilty, nor remember what your servant did wrong on the day when my lord the king came out from Jerusalem, so that the king would take it to heart. For your servant knows that I have sinned. Therefore, behold, I have come today, the first of all the house of Joseph, to go down to meet my lord the king. But Abishai, again, the son of Zeruiah, said, should not Shimei be put to death for this, because he cursed the Lord's anointed? David then said, what have I to do with you, O sons of Zeruiah? Now, sons of Zeruiah, Abishai, who's saying cut off Shimei's head, and Joab, who he's replacing with Amasa. So what have I to do with you, sons of Zeruiah? They're brothers, Joab and Abishai. He goes, that you should be an adversary to me. Should any man be put to death in Israel today? For do I not know that I am king over Israel today? I know that I'm king, and no man's going to die today. So it's my declaration. The king said to Shimei, you shall not die. Thus the king swore to him. So he's forgiving him, isn't he? Okay, and then we have Mephibosheth showing up. And I don't know, I'm assuming this time that Ziba did put him on a donkey and bring him because he's lame and he cannot come unless somebody loads him on a donkey and brings him to the king. Well, he's there. Then Mephibosheth, the son of Saul, came down to meet the king, and he had neither cared for his feet, nor trimmed his mustache, nor washed his clothes, from the day the king departed until the day he came back. It was when he came from Jerusalem to meet the king that the king said to him, why did you not go with me, Mephibosheth? So he answered, oh, my lord the king, my servant, his servant is Ziba, my servant deceived me. For your servant said, I will saddle a donkey for myself that I may ride on it and go with the king, because your servant is lame. Moreover, he has slandered your servant to my lord the king, but my lord the king is like the angel of God. Therefore, do what is good in your sight. It said he slandered him. The way he slandered him, do you remember? When Ziba brought all the goods to David, and David asked where Mephibosheth was, Ziba was like, oh, he said he was going to stay in Jerusalem. He didn't want to come because, he thought the house would be restored back to his father Saul through all this turmoil, right? And that's not at all what Mephibosheth said. And at that time, David was like, well, then you can just have everything I had given to Mephibosheth. You can have it all. He's like, oh, thank you so much. And now Mephibosheth saying, I'm lame. I couldn't come if someone didn't saddle a donkey and put me on it. And he didn't do that. And then he told you a lie. It's not true what he said. I didn't say. And so now, continue in verse 28. For all my father's household was nothing but dead men before my lord the king. Yet you set your servant among those who ate at your own table. Remember, he had Mephibosheth eating at his own table with his sons. He was like a son, like he had adopted him. And all of this was for Jonathan's sake, for keeping covenant with his beloved friend Jonathan, who was the son of Saul. And Mephibosheth was Jonathan's father. Jonathan was the father of Mephibosheth. So he goes, what right do I have yet that I should complain any more to the king? So the king said to him, why do you still speak of your affairs? I have decided you and Ziba shall divide the land. It was first all Mephibosheth. Then David said he could have all of it to Ziba. Now he's learning the truth, and he's like, you guys can divide the land. And Mephibosheth said to the king, let him even take it all, since my lord the king has come safely to his own house. He was so thankful that David had returned. Okay, and now we talk about Barzillai. Now Barzillai, the Gileadite, had come down from Rogelim, and he went on to the Jordan with the king to escort him over the Jordan. Barzillai was one of the three who came to David at Mahanaim. Do you remember in chapter 17 last week? At the end, it says, now, when David had come to Mahanaim, Shobi, Maker and Barzillai brought provisions, and we listed all those great provisions they brought, beds and basins, pottery, wheat, beans, it goes on and on, sheep and cheese and all this stuff to David and his household. Okay, so Barzillai had done that for David when he was in Mahanaim. So now listen to this encounter. Now Barzillai was very old, being 80 years old, and he had sustained the king while he stayed at Mahanaim, for he was a very great man. The king said to Barzillai, "You cross over with me, and I will sustain you in Jerusalem with me." But Barzillai said to the king, "How long have I yet to live, that I should go up with the king to Jerusalem? I am now 80 years old. Can I distinguish between good and bad? Or can your servant taste what I eat or what I drink? Or can I hear any more the voice of singing men and women? Why then should your servant be an added burden to my lord the king? Your servant would merely cross over the Jordan with the king. Who should the king compensate? Why should the king compensate me with the reward? Please let your servant return, that I may die in my own city near the grave of my father and my mother. However, here is your servant Chimham. Let him cross over with my lord the king, and do for him what is good in your sight." The king answered, "Chimham shall cross over with me, and I will do for him what is good in your sight, and whatever you request of me, I will do for you." All the people crossed over the Jordan, and the king crossed too. The king then kissed Barzillai and blessed him, and he returned to his place. Now the king went on to Gilgal, and Chimham went on with him, and all the people of Judah, and also half the people of Israel accompanied the king. And behold, all the men of Israel came to the king and said to the king, "Why had our brothers, the men of Judah, stolen you away and brought the king and his household and all David's men with him over the Jordan? You know, what caused Judah to suddenly know to go and get you before we had a chance to?" Of course, David had asked the priests to ask the elders of Judah for, And then all the men of Judah answered the men of Israel. They said, "Because the king is a close relative to us," from the tribe of Judah, right? "Why then are you angry about this matter? Have we eaten at all at the king's expense, or has anything been taken for us?" But the men of Israel answered the men of Judah and said, "We have 10 parts of the king. Therefore, we also have more claim on David than you. Was it not our advice first to bring back our king?" Yet the words of the men of Judah were harsher than the words of the men of Israel. Or you might say they bore more weight. So that's the end of our reading today. And basically, what does it mean that they had 10 parts in David? Well, Judah and Benjamin that were mentioned, that came first and took him over, well, those were 2 parts of 12. There were 12 tribes of Israel. So if those 2 parts, then the other 10 would be 10 parts of David, of all the tribes. But basically what happened was that later, after the death of Solomon, Solomon will be king in place when David dies. It'll be Solomon, his son. And then after Solomon, when his son comes into the kingship, the kingdom will be divided. There will be a northern kingdom of 10 tribes, a southern kingdom of 2 tribes. The southern kingdom of 2 tribes will be Judah and Benjamin. The other 10 will be the northern kingdom. So this is kind of the beginning of some of that separation that we'll see later in the history of Israel. Okay, so I want to make application. And the first thing I want to talk about, I kind of want to bring out what can we learn from Absalom and apply to our lives, and what can we learn from King David and apply to our lives. Well, Absalom had a lot of plans, didn't he? He planned to take over his father's kingdom, and he seemed to be having quite a bit of success. I mean, just about all of Israel was following him. And he had charisma. He had what it took, to influence people. And he was handsome, so he had all the worldly kind of charm going for him. But that doesn't mean he was doing the right thing, right? I mean, God didn't anoint him as king. God had anointed and set apart David to be king over Israel. So this was an act of rebellion on Absalom's part. Just years of bitterness just building up in him, and just something he decided to do. And it was not going to be blessed of God. And so in the meantime, he didn't know he'd be riding on his mule that day, and his head would be caught in an oak tree, and the mule would keep on going, and he would just be hanging there for whoever wanted to either rescue him or kill him. And obviously Joab wanted to kill him and put an end to the rebellion. So he died, and he died suddenly, and probably around the age of 40 or so. And so he died kind of in the middle of his life. And I wanted to look at how life is but a vapor, whether we die at 20 or 40 or as a young child, or live to be 70 or 80 or even beyond that. If we could live to be 100, no matter what, life is really fleeting, and it's really just a vapor, and then it's over. And I wanted to get some wisdom from the scriptures about that. And so first I wanted to look at a psalm that Moses wrote. Now, most of the psalms are written by David, but Moses had some psalms in the book of Psalms also. And he wrote Psalm 90. And I want to read the verse 10 and verse 12 of Psalm 90 that Moses wrote. Okay, so I want to look at those. I want to look them up, and I want to read them. So Psalm 90, verse 10, and then verse 12. As for the days of our life, they contain 70 years, or if due to strength, 80 years. Yet their pride is but labor and sorrow. For soon it is gone, and we fly away. So teach us to number our days, that we may present to you a heart of wisdom. So it's important that we number our days, that we realize that it could be our last day any day. We're not promised that 70 years. It's just saying that man is given 70 years. I mean, if you live out and nothing takes your life before the 70 years and you've got the health for it, you're going to make it to 70. And then, boy, if you're really healthy, you might make it to 80 or even beyond. But that's not the point of this scripture. The point of this scripture is teach us to number our days, whatever day we're on, because our days have been ordained by the Lord before there was yet one of them. Psalm 139 tells us that. The Lord knows the end from the beginning. He knows how long you're going to live, but you don't know. You have no idea. And so another one I want to read to you is David himself in Psalm 39, this is a psalm written by David. This is his heart and how he prayed to the Lord. Psalm 39, and I'll read 4 through 7. Lord, make me to know my end, and what is the extent of my days? Let me know how transient I am. Behold, you have made my days as handbreadths, and my lifetime as nothing in your sight. Surely every man at his best is a mere breath. Surely every man walks about as a phantom. Surely they make an uproar for nothing. He amasses riches and does not know who will gather them. And now, Lord, for what do I wait? My hope is in you. David had his heart in the right place. David put his hope in the Lord, not in his riches, not in people that had betrayed him and hurt him, not in all these other places, in the Lord. And then Jesus taught that this amassing of riches that David mentions here, and then he has to leave them. It reminds me of that parable Jesus taught in Luke chapter 12. So let's go to the New Testament and go to the Gospel of Luke and go to chapter 12 of the Gospel of Luke. And start reading in verse 15. Okay, and Jesus said to them, beware and be on your guard against every form of greed, for not even when one has an abundance does his life consist of his possessions. And he told them a parable saying, the land of a rich man was very productive. And he began reasoning to himself, saying, what shall I do since I have no place to store my crops? Then he said, this is what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, soul, you have many goods laid up for many years to come. Take your ease, eat, drink, and be merry. But God said to him, you fool, this very night your soul is required of you, and now who will own what you have prepared? So is the man who stores up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God. And you know, Absalom was pretty selfish, wasn't he? I mean, he had built a monument for himself to preserve his own name, called Absalom's monument. He hadn't had a son to preserve his name, so he built a monument for himself. So that's putting treasures in your own needs, right? And not being rich toward God. His father David was rich toward God. So there's quite a comparison between the two, isn't there? And the other one I wanted to read, just one more about the fleeting time of our life, was James, the book of James. It's not far in front of Revelation by Hebrews, James, and then Peter's. I think James is between Hebrews and Peter. Yeah, James is right after Hebrews, okay? And I'm in chapter 4, and I'm going to read, starting in verse 13. Okay. Come now, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go to such and such a city and spend a year there and engage in business and make a profit. Yet you do not know what your life will be like tomorrow. You are just a vapor that appears for a little while and then vanishes away. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we will live and also do this or that. If the Lord wills. And so, have you heard people say, oh, sure, I'll be there, Lord willing? Just adding Lord willing on there, because we should live in such a humble way that we don't know for sure what tomorrow brings. And we don't know for sure if we can keep our obligations and our plans. Absalom thought he was going to become king. He didn't know that his head was going to get caught in an oak tree that day. He should have said, if the Lord wills. And he would have found out the Lord didn't will for him to have the kingdom. It belonged to his father. And you know, God will have his way, right? God will have his way. So then I think of David. And I think of David as what God continued to refer to him as, a man after God's own heart. I think about how he loved his son Absalom unconditionally. I mean, his son had betrayed him and was planning to kill him, and yet his heart, his father's heart, was so broken that he wished he would have died instead of Absalom. He loved him no matter what he did. And also, David had seen God be gracious to him and God have mercy on him, and he had been given a chance to live and not die for the things he had done. And he wanted mercy extended to his son Absalom in the same way. But it didn't happen like David had hoped. But David had a heart of mercy, forgiveness, and unconditional love. And you see that with Shimei, however you say it, the one who cursed him and stoned him, and he didn't retaliate at the time it was happening, and now at the end when he's being restored to his kingdom, and Abishai is still intent on this guy should lose his life for cursing the Lord's anointed. David was like, I'm the king and I'll make the decisions, and Shimei, you're forgiven and you're not going to die, and you've got my word on that. Forgiveness and mercy. And then we see, even with the situation with Mephibosheth and Ziba, I mean, you see David having such a heart to look for Jonathan's son and bring Mephibosheth into his own household and treat him as his own son and care for all of his needs. And even though Ziba comes and supplies him with things and does lie to him about Mephibosheth and tricks him into him saying, well, then you can have all that I had left for Mephibosheth. When he learns the truth from Mephibosheth and he hears that he had been deceived by Ziba, he still said, I've made a decision to divide the land between you two. I mean, after all, Ziba did bring supplies to him and so forth. And it's like he just made this decision to divide the land. And so that was cool. And then with Barzillai and Chimham, it's just returning kindness, just rewarding people and saying, whatever you want, Barzillai, you've been faithful to me, I'm going to be faithful to you. What do you want? And he's like, well, my servant Chimham to go over with you. Well, whatever you say, whatever you request, I'll do for him and I'll do for you. A heart of gratefulness. And I just want a heart like David, don't you guys? The Bible tells us in Matthew 6:33 that if we seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, then everything we need in the way of the world's riches and whatever's needed to take care of us, it'll be there for us. God will take care of us. He said he took care of the birds. He made the flowers so beautiful, and he even cares more for us. So we need to have a heart like David, to be seeking the Lord above all else. And in Romans 12:1 and 2, we're told that we can be a living and a holy sacrifice, which is our spiritual worship to God. So as we take our body and we make it a living and holy sacrifice for God, we'll use our legs to walk and share the gospel with others. We'll use our arms to hug people who need to know that they're cared for. We'll use our hands to work for the Lord. We'll use our mouth to proclaim him until he comes. We will live a holy sacrifice to him. We will seek first his kingdom. And in Romans it says that if we do not conform to the ways of the world, but we transform our minds by the renewing of our minds, this word of God will renew your mind. And when we do that, then we will know the will of God. And it tells us 3 things that the will of God is. It's good, it's perfect, and it's acceptable. So don't ever think, oh, well, if I knew the will of God, I wouldn't be able to accept it. Yes, you would. It's acceptable. It's good, it's perfect, and it is acceptable. So don't you want a heart like David? Not like Absalom, who wants to take over other things that don't belong to you, who wants to live a selfish life, who wants to be consumed with self and with all the things that you can attain in this life that has no meaning at all, because our life's just a vapor and it could be gone tomorrow. We don't know what tomorrow holds. Don't you want a heart like David, who wrote these Psalms and put his trust in the Lord? Put your trust in the Lord and wait on the Lord and know that he will reveal to you his will, and it is good and perfect and acceptable. I want to live like David and have a heart after God's own heart. Well, that's wrapping up another week, and we'll meet together next week for the next 2 chapters. And it's starting our final workbook, book 11 of 11. And I have quite a mailing list, but if you would like to also be included, I will mail you a workbook. So let me know if you would like the final workbook from our 1st and 2nd Samuel series, workbook 11 of 11. And we're going to finish up the book of 2nd Samuel in the next few weeks. Well, God bless you guys, and I'll see you next time.